What's up, everyone? Welcome to this week's edition of The Point. I'm your host, Ana Kasparian, and this week we're doing something a little different. Usually we have a two-person panel and we ask them what their points are. We talk about the viral news stories of the week. This week we're kind of going to do the same. However, I have one special guest who I'm going to interview, and then later on we're going to get to all the fun topics of the week. I invited Colin Wright back on the program because I was intrigued by his story, and I think that you guys will find his story just as interesting as I did. He is an author and a world traveler. In fact, he's created an entire business out of traveling around the world, and he is a very cultured, intelligent guy who has a lot of fun stories to share with us. Later on, as I mentioned, we'll get to the topics, including where our shrimp comes from. Okay, so if you're a shrimp lover in the U.S., there's some pretty terrible facts behind the scenes that we're going to tell you about. But before we get to all of that, Colin, I want to ask you some questions about your life.
Let's do it.
I want to know who you are. All right, Colin. So let's get started with the moment your life kind of took charge. And what I mean by that is at the age of 19, you realized you don't want to do things the way people typically do things. And you decided to kind of start your own business. What happened?
Yeah, well, I've always worked. I got my first job when I was like 11. And so I was always working for different people in different companies and trying out things. And I learned to work harder than most other people as a result. So at 19, I was working at a magazine in college, when I was in college, as one of my 5 jobs that I was using to put myself through school. And I had a couple of ideas, things that we might be able to do to better compete with the other magazines in town. And the boss, when I told him about it, he essentially said, "Know your place, kid."
Damn. Pay your dues, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, well, okay, I will. I mean, it's not here. My place is not here. And so I went and started my own magazine. And the idea wasn't to try to usurp or to try to show him, that I knew what I was doing. I really wanted to try out these ideas. It was something simple. It seems silly now. Let's do an online version of the magazine. But to him, it didn't make any sense. Why do it if it hasn't been done already? And for me, the idea of trying these things and seeing what happens was motivation enough.
That's so incredible. Well, as I get older and as I become more experienced in my own career path, I'm noticing more and more that if you listen to authority and you play by the rules, you're the least likely to succeed. Because there are gatekeepers to success, and if you're willing to abide by those gatekeepers, you're not going to get very far. So I love the fact that you knew what your passion was and you created something through your creative abilities. What kind of advice would you give to someone who wants to do the same thing, but they feel like they have certain obligations? They got to pay the bills, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. I would say know where your money's going to come from. And I was lucky that I had a bunch of other jobs at the time, and I was a student, so I could afford to be very poor and still kind of make my way through that lifestyle. But I would also say get accustomed to the idea of failure. For me, that magazine, it did really, really well, like in a very public way, and it was in all the newspapers, and people were like, "Young Wonderkind," and then it collapsed. I let so many people down, and it really just, in a very public fashion also, because people love a failure story, it was all over the place, and everything that I did wrong was made very clear, and what it turned out is I knew how to design a magazine and make a magazine, didn't know how to run a business. And learning that was a very difficult lesson. One I remember very distinctly, but the more important lesson for myself was that I can fail and get back up. And so if the worst should happen and this thing I'm going to try like utterly fails in such a public way, I know that I will pull inward for a second and allow myself to cry a little bit and then move forward and try something new.
So how did you recover from that? Like, is it just something in you? Are you just this resilient person who's not afraid of failure, or did it take some coaching?
It was a little bit of allowing myself to feel the pain for a moment, for a couple of days, just not seeing anybody, just staying inside my apartment, never wanting to leave again, but then realizing there was other stuff I wanted to do. Like there's a lot of things worth trying, and if I allow myself to have that ceiling and say, I'm never going to try because I might fail, what could I do? Like, you have the chance to fail with anything. And so accepting that and recognizing it and kind of making that your power, that you will be like a failure zombie where you'll get knocked down and come back up and cling and start crawling again. Even if you're just a torso and some arms, you'll still keep climbing. Like, reflecting on that and realizing that it's a superpower in a way if you can do that. And then allowing yourself to try, yourself to try in situations where that might happen.
Yeah, you have the right mindset. And, a lot of people fail at a lot of things. And the way that I like to look at it is whenever I come across doubters, and I've had my fair share of doubters, or whenever I do fail at something, I use that as fuel to like fight harder, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I talked about this on the Young Turks once. I said something about how my haters kind of turn me on. And they don't turn me on sexually. Like I don't read these terrible comments about myself and be like, oh my God, I gotta go in the room
Yeah.
and like rub one out. That's not how it goes. But I read those comments and I think, oh, you think I suck? Well, I'm gonna show you, right? And I get
Yeah.
really like excited about proving myself. And you know, maybe it's different for you, but for me, it is a "what now, bitch" type of mentality. But I don't know. You seem a
That's a
lot
good
more.
approach.
Yeah, you're a lot more calm when it comes to the failure than I am.
I tend to filter really well in terms of comments. Like YouTube comments are pretty salacious and crazy. Like
Yes.
Amazon comments, like for your books, like these are things. Like I take a long. You put a lot of effort into these things,
Yes.
and then somebody comes in. And they're less likely to just say, like, to just spout profanity and something that has nothing to do with what's going on. They will tell you exactly why you are intellectually inferior in every way.
And that's tough.
And,
Yeah.
and you have to go through and filter it, because sometimes there's some decent advice in there, like you actually did something that you could improve upon. But in a lot of cases, looking at the haters, you have to go through and say, is this for me or is this for them? Is this them making sure that they feel bigger by insulting somebody else? Or is this actually intended for me, in which case I can deal with a little bit of vitriol if it means growing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so you are living the dream. You are doing what people hope that they can do one day when they retire. You're traveling the world, you're seeing things, you're learning about different cultures, different people. How did that come about? And how do you finance something like that?
It's actually not as expensive as you'd think. I was living in LA almost 7 years ago, and I was running a branding studio, and things were going really well financially and business-wise. This was a big business success. Didn't have the epic failure, thankfully. But I found myself living kind of a version of the American dream, the work hard, play hard lifestyle, nice townhouse near the beach, and spending a whole lot more money than I was making, even though I was making a decent amount of money.
The American way.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of realized that it wasn't doing it for me. And taking a step back on my 24th birthday, like looking at the big picture for the first time in a very long time, I realized that I was going to end up like all of these mentors that I had. And they were wonderful people, and for them to teach me all of these things about business was wonderful, but they were very unhappy, really unfulfilled, and in most cases their families hated them and they were unhealthy. Like everything about their life other than business, they were failing at cataclysmically. Like those muscles had atrophied. And I didn't want that. And I recognized that and acknowledged it for the first time and realized something needed to change. And kind of the long story short of it is that I gave myself 4 months in which to change everything and scaled down my business to something I could run from my laptop, and got rid of everything that I owned that didn't fit into carry-on luggage, which is like a walk-in closet full of clothes and 8 computers that I had for some reason, and the car and the townhouse and everything, paid off all of my debt, and I started a blog, like one does when you have no idea what you're doing with your life. And I started writing about these things, this transition, the things that I wanted to do. The main one was travel. I was 24. My dream was to travel. I was ostensibly earning all of this money so I could travel the world. I had never left the country.
Wow.
always
So
had-
at 24, you hadn't left the country yet.
There was always more important things to do, but we show our priorities by how we act, by what we actually spend our time on. And I wasn't showing my priorities. So I decided that I would figure out a mechanism to travel, set up, I had no idea where to go, though. So I set up on my blog a voting form so people could vote on what country I would move to. And like almost 7 years later, I still do it the same way. And I fund it now, though, through my books. I write full time. I've written 30 some odd books on a bunch of different topics. I have all of my time to spend on this, though. So thankfully, I have a lot of time to sit and edit and design the covers and do all of that.
That's incredible. So you write your books. That's how you're financing all this traveling that you do. The traveling then gives you experiences you can write about.
Exactly.
So you keep your fans happy, your readers happy. That's really incredible. And you are doing something that I think is really important. It's really difficult to publish a book, right? Especially if you're not like some hotshot, big name person who has hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter. I've tried to publish a book, and again, there are those gatekeepers to success.
Oh, yeah.
But you were able to kind of bypass those gatekeepers by creating your own publishing company. How did that come about?
Well, I found myself, gosh, it would have been 6 years ago. In New Zealand, I was in a place where I couldn't do business because the internet is so terrible. The country's gorgeous, but the internet is a travesty. They're still doing dial-up internet while I was living there. And so I spent more time on these books and thought they might be a valid way to make a living. I was able to do it in a lot of ways because I had already accrued an audience for my blogging, which I wasn't making any money off of directly, but you can, in some cases, take these audiences and say, hey, you're willing to pay attention to this. Maybe you'd like a longer format version. It's a couple of bucks.
Yep.
Did that a couple of times. Didn't really know what I was doing again. It was like a trial by fire type of learning process. But I did it enough that 8 months later, I was able to pay all of my bills with the revenue from my books. And so I stopped doing all of the brand consulting that I was doing. And then I met up with a couple of friends of mine who were former readers, actually, who were able to make a living off of their books as well. And we realized we had the same philosophy on publishing, which is that it's changing. We should figure out kind of asymmetric means of approaching it. And we had the same philosophy on business and the people that we wanted to work with. And so we formed Asymmetrical Press and pooled our resources, and we were able to kind of amplify that indie publishing business model.
That's incredible. And has the publishing company been successful?
Yeah, oh, it's been great. In terms of the brand has like grown, and a lot of people want to work with us. We're scaling slowly so we can make sure that we do well by everybody.
Right.
But the people that we work with and the types of work that we produce, that's the way that we gauge it. And yeah, really happy with the authors that we publish, and really happy
That's
with what we're able
awesome.
to do as a result.
Well, maybe I need to give you a call because I have some ideas, if you know what I mean. But that's awesome. That's really good to hear. All right, let's get back to your traveling just a little bit. Really fascinated to hear which country you enjoyed the least. You've been all over the place.
Oh.
It doesn't have to be a country other than the U.S.
Right. Yeah, the U.S. states themselves are like individual countries.
Yes,
like
they are.
We've got a huge, almost like a European Union within our own borders. It's difficult because every place is like amazing and terrible for different reasons, and everybody has pros and cons. Within the U.S., there's a lot of things I don't like and think we could do better. A lot of things I think we do better than anybody else. One of the places I usually list as both my favorite and least favorite is India. Living in Calcutta was a very different experience than a lot of other parts of India as well. But it is kind of the city left behind. And the people there are amazing, and the food is amazing. The infrastructure and the politics there are a travesty, and some of the worst I've seen anywhere in the world in terms of corruption and the way in which they let things fall apart and let the people, especially at the bottom of the totem pole, suffer.
Wow, that's incredible. How long were you in that area?
I lived in Calcutta for 5 months.
Wow, okay. And usually that's what you do when you travel. You'll be there for about 4 months.
Yeah, typically 3 to 5 months, depending on what I can manage with my visas.
So you've been to college, and I would argue that getting educated in a formal institution here in the U.S. is nothing compared to the education you get when you travel around the world.
Yeah, I think it's different. Like, I have a lot of friends who didn't go to university and just started traveling or started their own businesses. I think that's perfectly legitimate, a great way to learn as well, and you learn very different things. I had a really good experience. I was still paying off debt up until I left LA. But I learned a lot of philosophy that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Like real world practical stuff. I didn't make a cent off of what I learned in college. That I had to learn from the jobs I was working to pay for college. But I did learn a lot of philosophies that are not practical, but have been very useful in learning more about myself and learning about the world later.
That's awesome. I love your story. You guys should definitely check out his work, his books, obviously, his blog. Where is your blog? Where can people find it?
The blog is exilelifestyle.com, and the books are at colin.io.
Awesome. You guys should definitely check that out. Hey guys, I have an awesome new announcement for you. Turns out that The Point will be hosted on the video platform watchable.com. All you have to do is go to watchable.com and search for The Point, and boom, you'll see our videos, you'll see our content, and we really want to make sure that The Point is available on all these different and awesome, great platforms. So take a look, tell us what you think, and we'll see you soon.